evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Last time I was here, there was a real demand for AWS IAM. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. That's the topic. This is going to be a foundational session. So it's going to be basics. We're also going to be adding some things on top of basic, which might be a bit more advanced. But in general, this will be basic. So if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand, and we can talk about it. So identity and access management, IAM in AWS. So it's really the core service, and it's also how everything interacts with each other in AWS. So when you think about cloud, or you think about any cloud provider, be this Google, AWS, Azure, Alibaba, even as well, think of the cloud as a bunch of API calls, right? To thousands of endpoints, thousands of calls happening per second. When a call is made to a specific endpoint, right, it goes through a certain evaluation flow. The evaluation flow that I'm talking about is this diagram right here. Now, for now, I don't want you to think about the squares and the arrows. I really need you to grasp the steps or the stages, right? So when a call is made from one point to the other, IAM evaluates via these stages or steps. The first being a deny evaluation. So for example, if you have a S3 bucket, that S3 bucket has a bucket policy on it. Now, even if that bucket policy is empty, the call will be denied. So that's an implicit deny. So a deny where there isn't a direct rule actually denying the call. An explicit deny is when there's an actual rule that says deny. Okay, so that's the first stage that a call needs to pass to have a status code 200 or a success. The next being SCPs. Now, SCPs are service control policies. These are IAM policies that you attach on your AWS organization, which is a collection of accounts. There's also something called an OU, which is an organizational unit, all right? Which is also just a list of accounts, all right? Account in AWS is a collection of IAM identities. So when you think about service control policies, you can use this visual aid right here. So you'll see IAM policies can be attached to the root, which is the primary root account. So that means everything, right? It can be attached to the OU, which is, like we said, the collection of accounts, or a list of accounts, basically. And then it can be attached to separate accounts as well. Now, a good example of a service control policy can be something like denying all publicly accessible S3 buckets. Or it can be something like denying the use of the root user, or denying the use of unencrypted EBS volumes, stuff like that. All right, so think about the service control policies as being attached on the organizational level. So the account level, the OU level, or ultimately the root level. So the third evaluation is resource-based policies. So these are the bucket policies that we talked about earlier. This is what sits on the IAM identity, and this is what dictates what can actually access that IAM identity. So think about an IAM role, right? That'll have a resource-based policy attached to it, which in the case of the IAM role will be called a trust policy, dictating what can assume that role. All right, so that's the third stage. Then the fourth stage is identity-based policies. So think of that as the permissions attached to your IAM principal or whatever's making the calls in AWS. Right, so that's the permissions policy. So the list of actions, right? So let's say you have IAM user. That'll have a permissions policy attached that says it can list S3 buckets in your account, something like that. All right. The fifth being IAM permission boundaries. Now, IAM permission boundaries do not grant any permissions, right? They only specify the maximum amount of permissions a user or role can do. So think about it. When you think about permission boundaries, you can think about this cat, right? So the red tape, that's the permission boundary, right? So it doesn't give the cat a jetpack or the ability to do backflips or whatever. The cat doesn't have any actions or permissions it can take. The permission boundary merely specifies the maximum amount of permissions. Let's say in the real world, you'll have an IAM user that you create, but you don't want that IAM user to necessarily create more IAM users. Then you'll attach a permissions boundary that says, listen, deny the creation of an IAM user. Allow all, but deny that. And that's a permission boundary in layman's terms. Okay. Anyway, just a noteworthy thing. Session policies, it's quite advanced. So for this session, I don't want to go into it. It's basically just a restriction that you put on a session. So that can be a role session or a federated session, etc. But for now, don't worry about that. It's quite advanced. Okay, IAM building blocks. So you get users, groups, roles, and policies. Think about users as being long-term credentials, right? Think about roles as being short-term credentials. Think about groups, collections of users, that's easy to remember. And then IAM policies, that's the JSON files that you see in AWS, saying who, what, where, and why, under what conditions. All right. Then just a quick note, IAM principles is the thing making the call, right? So this is usually a thing like a user role making the call in AWS. Okay, so a bit more about IAM users. So like we said, IAM users are long-term credentials in AWS. It has a permissions policy attached, directly attached to the IAM user, right? Best practice in terms of security is to rotate those credentials every 90 days, right? And then also to attach a permission boundary to minimize your blast radius or your attack surface in AWS. You don't want 10,000 IAM users in your account. You don't know where the keys are. It gets committed to a GitHub repo, and then you lose all your credits in your AWS account when it gets compromised or something like that. Okay, just a noteworthy point there, no trust policy on an IAM user. Okay, so that'll make a bit more sense when we go to the demo. So we're going to go in the console, we're going to create a user, right? We're going to attach a permissions policy to that user with a set permissions for S3. Then we're going to go and test our access out in the AWS CLI, add more permissions, and then test things out with a permission boundary. All right. Okay. Okay, just give me a moment. Okay, so we're currently logged into the AWS console as an IAM user, right? What we'll go and do now is we'll create a new IAM user in this account. So we'll go to the IAM console. You see in identity and access management, you have a lot of options here. Let's go to users, right? That's what we want to do. We'll say create user. Now let's say CB user. We don't need access to the console at the moment, right? That's fine. Oop. Say next. So we have the option to add a user to a group. We can copy permissions, or we can just attach a policy directly, right? And that's what we're going to do. So let's search for S3. Let's go in here. Let's open this up to see what it looks like. Okay. Okay, so here we can see this is S3 wildcard, which means all actions in S3, right? S3 object lambda, that's just a type of setup that you can do, not important for now, but just note wildcard means everything, so full access. We'll select it, we'll go out a bit. Okay, so here you can see we have the option to actually set the permission boundary as well. Okay, so just that's a noteworthy point to take. Now we go and say next and create user. Okay, so super important. We have our user, it has S3 permissions, right? But how are we going to use the IAM identity? We can't, right? It's not a role that we can assume. We need to create long-term credentials. That's what we previously mentioned. So we need to create a set hard-coded creds. Now, we have a couple of options for IAM user, but for this demo, we're going to do access keys, right? Let's say command line interface, that's what we're going to do. We understand and we wish to proceed. Let's say, okay, we're not going to tag things. Okay, cool, great. Now we have our credentials, right? Now let's try and hook this up in the console. So we have our access key here. Let's zoom a bit in. Oop. Okay, so via the AWS CLI, right? You just install it. It's quite easy. Just do version 2 is a must. So to load those credentials in, you need to run AWS configure. Then we'll ask for your access key and secret key. All right, so we'll just pop the access key in there and then the secret key. And keep that default. Okay, cool. So it's loaded in. Now, whenever you find keys on the internet, don't try and find some, but just if you do, run AWS SDS, which is the security token service in AWS. That's also where you get keys for IAM roles that we'll go into just now. So AWS SDS get caller identity. Okay, cool. It told us, okay, it's this account, right? It's this user or ARN, Amazon resource name. Okay, now we have a bit of information. Now, something that you want to run also is list user policies to really do some enumeration in security, that's what you call it. So when you're discovering what permissions you have and where you can hop to the next phase, all right? Okay, but we're not going to do that for now. What we want to do is, we want to go back to the console and we want to see, okay, cool, what permissions do I have? Okay, we have S3, all right? Let's try AWS S3, ls. Okay, cool. So we can see our S3 buckets. That did work. So, because we have S3 permissions and it's attached directly to the IAM user. Okay. Let's try something else, another permission. Let's say IAM create user. I think it's user name. Let's try and create a user to see if this works. Let's say test user. Cool. Okay, so we have an error. It says identity-based policy. No identity-based policy allows this create IAM user, right? So what does that mean? Let's go back to our graph. Let's see where we got stuck, right? So it passed, looks like it passed these stages, but it got stuck here at the identity-based policies, and that's the policy, that's the permissions policy that's on the principal making the call. All right. Okay, so let's go to the console and let's add some permissions, right? So we say add permissions, attach policy directly. Let's add IAM full access, why not? So it has some organizations, permissions, and it has IAM wildcard. IAM permissions is something that you do want to safeguard always. It's super important to have a good grip and visibility into what resources or identities have IAM access. Okay, but for now, let's add it quickly. Let's see, add permissions. Cool, the permissions were added. So let's go back quickly and let's try and recreate that user. Beautiful, okay. Okay, so it did work. So we created, we've added IAM permissions, right? We've given it the identity-based policy permissions that it needed to create or to make that call, right? So it created a new user. Now we can go ahead and create access keys for that user and so on and so forth, right? Let's quickly try and add a permission boundary and then see how that differs or what influence that has on the permission itself. So, like we said, an IAM user or a permission boundary, sorry, it doesn't give you permissions. It only specifies the maximum amount of permissions, all right, that a user can have. So that's why this says admin, full admin on all resources, but it only denies create role and create user. All right, does that make sense? Okay. So let's try that call. Well, first off, we should attach it. Okay, and then let's try that call again. Beautiful. Okay, so it said with an explicit deny and a permission boundary, and it named the permission boundary. So now yet again we can see that it got stuck on the permission boundary stage. What I'm getting at here, guys, is that every call goes through these stages, right, for it to get accepted or denied. So whenever you're sitting and you're building something cool and you're really making progress in life, it feels like in general sometimes, and you get hit with the access denied, it's usually just follow the logic. It's not random, right? It does make sense. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but it really does. Okay. So let's start going through roles. Oop, okay, so I don't know, Henny, do we share the PowerPoint? Because I did. Okay. I did put in a few cool commands that you guys can play around with if you'd like. Yeah. Okay, so IAM roles. So like we've said also, IAM roles are short-term access in AWS, right? And it can also be assumed by a principal, be that an IAM user, a Lambda, any AWS service in general can assume a role. I also said new role, new permissions, right? Because when let's say you're an IAM user, right, with admin, you assume a new role with S3 permissions only. The permissions don't stack up when you're assuming the new role. The old permissions get thrown away. If you assume that new role, you only have S3 full access. Okay. Now, how do roles work? So let's say you're an identity, you want to assume a role, you'll call out to the assume role API. That'll go out to SDS. SDS will then go and check on the role's trust policy or the resource-based policy if that specific IAM identity or principal is allowed to assume the role. If it's not in the trust policy, then it gets denied. If it is, SDS gives that role access or gives the principal access, and it also provides the principal with a session token, access key, and secret key. Okay. So a role, unlike IAM users, has two policies attached. The first being a trust policy, so that's the resource-based policy. That's the policy on the role that says who, what, and how it can be assumed. All right, so then it also has a permissions policy, which is the actual actions that it can do. All right, so those are the two types of policies on a specific IAM role. Okay, so a little role demo. We're going to be creating a role, we're going to assume it, and we'll see kind of how our old permissions fall away and that we get the new permissions. So we are currently logged in as this IAM user, right? Sorry, sec user 1. So this is an IAM user, it has admin, and it can just about do anything. We'll go on IAM roles, we'll say create role. Now we have a few options here. We'll say custom trust policy, and now we get met with this. Oop, it's a bit much. Okay, so it sees, or you can see that the action is STS assume role. That's the API call permission that it needs, or that the principal needs to assume or to call or to assume a role. Now, what we need to slot in here is our principal, right? The principal is the thing making the call. So let's say add principal. Let's say IAM user. Well, first off, let's grab the account ID. Say principal user. Okay. We'll say sec user 1. So bam, we've added our principal there, which is our IAM user that we're currently logged in as. We'll go on next. We'll say S3. Okay, we're naming our role, then we're going to go on create role. Okay, great, it's created. In the console, you can do this programmatically via the CLI. You can do this within a service or in code as well in a script. You can go and say, well, this is the console or the UI version of doing this, but you can go on new role. Okay, so we're slotting in the account ID, then also the role name. What was the role again? Let's see, I think it was. Oop. Okay, sorry. So immediately, when we've assumed the role, you can see that we don't actually have permissions in IAM, right? Which means that we've totally left our old permissions because we assumed a new role, which is a new IAM identity. Okay, so, and when we go to S3, we'll see that we can see and access everything in S3 because this role itself, the standalone role, only has S3 permissions. All right. Are there any questions on that so far? Yes?
It says there's only one admin user. When you accidentally do this, what happens?
Oh, you can just remember, so you can just close the session, you can go back to the console UI, and you can just log in if you have the access keys of that IAM user. There is also something called a root user that every account has, which is like the God creds. You should always keep that as a break glass user, so almost never use it, and only in emergencies. Some organizations actually delete it totally, but yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so for the last example, we're going to do a bit of a more real-world scenario, right? So let's say you have an S3 bucket in your company, someone uploads a file in there, right? You want to process the data or you want to send the data through to some other service in your microservices architecture, right? How would that work in terms of permissions? So first of your S3 bucket, you can leave that. You'll have to add the S3 bucket, but only the action put object as a trigger on the AWS Lambda function, right? The Lambda function, like we've also said, has a resource-based policy attached directly to it, but it also has an IAM role with the identity-based policy attached to it. All right. So, okay, so let's quickly take a look there. I'll go and not use the role that I'm currently logged in. I'll go back to my IAM user. Let's go to Lambda. Who here has played around with Lambda? Okay. So it's basically just you're running a small piece of code in the cloud, okay? It's actually within a micro VM, and the reason why AWS does it that way is because of the security concerns in terms of the levels of virtualization. I don't know exactly how it is. I read up on it, but it's very, very interesting if you want to have a good read. Go and read about how they actually deploy Lambdas, how it works, why they chose to do it in a micro VM and not a container, for example. It's very interesting. Okay, but anyway. So in our code, we're basically just printing out the event because Lambda functions are event-driven. So they have triggers and they also have destinations. So they'll ingest something and they'll process it and drop it somewhere else. Okay, so in the configuration pane, we'll see permissions, right? We'll see the execution role. So for the moment, this execution role, all permissions that it has is only to write logs. And we want to see the logs to see if the event actually got processed successfully. So you'll see on the default execution role that this is the permissions policy attached, right? Or the identity-based policy. Down below, this is the most important thing. So this is actually the resource-based policy. So when I open it up, you'll see that the principal is S3, the effect is allow, and the action is Lambda invoke function. So that's super important. We'll do a test run quickly, and then we'll do another test run without this policy just to see what happens and how it differs. All right. So we're in our S3 bucket. Let me just find it quickly. Let's upload. I've just been uploading a template for now. Okay, upload succeeded. Going back to the Lambda, you'll see that there's a trigger configured, which is for the S3 bucket. And whenever an event type of S3 object created, that includes put object, whenever that thing or that event happens, the Lambda will be triggered.
Sorry, just to confirm, your IAM user had full access to S3, right? Create and upload files.
Yeah.
And this event is what is triggering the Lambda. But if you don't create the permissions to Lambda, this event will not be triggered.
Yeah, no, I'm getting what you're saying. So going back to this slide, it goes both ways. So you first off need permissions, or you need settings to allow something to interact with you as a Lambda function, and you need, let's say, a list of configurations to interact with other resources. So you'll always have identity-based policy, the stuff that you can do, or permissions policy, and you'll always have a trust policy, which is on a role, which just says, this can assume me under these conditions. All right?
Okay, so let's say in a real world, I am in a data team. I provide data, so I just drop data in the S3 bucket, and then a different team needs to consume that data and trigger a Lambda event. So we need to then speak to each other and have the.
Are you using the same bucket?
Yes.
Okay, no. Then you can set up one Lambda function with one trigger, and you'll actually just go into the console, into the Lambda function itself, and you'll go on triggers, and you'll say add trigger. You'll say source S3, bucket, you'll just select a random bucket. For these event types, I usually just say put. That's also always the best. Is this a manual upload?
But it's automated job.
Okay. No, then you can just say all object create events. That should be fine. Just be careful of a situation where an S3 bucket invokes another S3 bucket, something like that, because then you can have like a literal circle of them just invoking each other the whole time. So just be careful of that as well. But yeah, that's how you basically set it up. Okay, anyway, so let's say we want to see if the event actually triggered. So we'll go into CloudWatch, which is the monitoring service in AWS. It's quite integral and super important to always have a CloudWatch log stream on your resources, especially when working with ECS tasks, any serverless service in that sense. Super important to have it there. Also, things like CloudTrail, which is more the management events. You can enable data events, but it's a bit more expensive. But yeah, okay, so let's quickly have a look. I think it should be that time. Yeah, it was 2 minutes ago. And you can see that, sorry. You can see that the event did trigger, right? So you can see it just printed out the event just like that. So yeah, you had, like we've said, you need permissions on both sides. First, the one providing or allowing access to whatever you need to trigger, and then also the side where you need permissions, which is the list of actions that you can do to interact with anything in AWS. Okay. So there's just one more slide saying an execution role or the permissions policy is what the Lambda function can do, and then also the resource-based policy, the one that allowed S3 to make that call, that is the resource-based policy. Okay, and yeah, just to reiterate, first off, IAM isn't random. Things do make sense. If you understand that second diagram, or the first diagram, sorry, it's really, 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 really super important to understand it. And yeah, IAM is manageable. And yeah, you can literally debug anything if you understand that flow. All right, yeah, that's it from my side. Any questions?
What is the difference between the AWS configure and the SSO configure?
Oh, okay. So AWS SSO, that uses the federated identity. So you'll have a AD on-prem that your users will be synced to, and there's a number of ways to do it, to skin the cat, but your on-prem identities will basically be reflected in AWS in Identity Center. AWS configure is just an AWS CLI command that you can run to load in your creds. But usually when I'm working with SSO creds, I assume that's what you're mentioning. Like, how do you work with SSO creds in the terminal? Okay, so you'll literally, okay, I'm not going to do it with my company's one, but I don't want to show all the accounts. But yeah, you literally just go on. There is a setting when you click on account, it says access keys. You click on that, right? And you literally just copy the export commands. It's 3 lines. Access key, secret key, and session token. And that's what you'll just paste into the AWS CLI, and then Bob's your uncle.
Back to the S3 to Lambda function. It seems like for new users, you might allow them to access the S3, right? If they find a random S3 bucket and that's connected to the Lambda function, and they just drop something to store something, is that automatically triggering?
Yeah, it's going to trigger. In AWS, thank you. in AWS, 90% of security events or security-related issues, sorry, this might be a tangent, is misconfiguration related. So these are things like those access keys being somewhere on the internet, or an S3 bucket that's public. Basically, attackers will use any foothold they can get, be this just getting the account ID and then running. Remember, AWS is just a bunch of API calls, like we said, so they'll just run all the API calls to see what they have access to. If you want to have a look at things like that, you can download Paku, which is a red team testing tool, and you can really play around with things. If you have a friend that has an AWS account, maybe, no, don't prank him, but maybe you can have some fun. It's just really, really interesting. But yes, the events, the triggers are configured on that specific action. So whatever is the source of the action, it will run. Didn't you ask a question, sir? Okay.
Our question is about the largest of IAM groups. Is it that's just not conclusion? Is it that you create an IAM and then assign policies to that, and then each user is able to automatically assign?
No. As far as I understand, it's per user. I think, yeah. I haven't used IAM groups really, to be honest. I don't know. Henny, is it the fact that it cascades down to all the users in the group? Is it? Okay, so it is per user. Okay.
You want to showcase that this is a very, very, very private account we can follow.
Wow. Okay.
We can go play around there.
Wow.
Okay.
This is like being in Gordon Ramsay's kitchen, you know, just, it's quite nerve-wracking. Okay.
Okay, let's see. Change.
Is it just the portal?
Yeah. Okay. So what I have is just going to show you. So what I have is I've set this up in a SSO configuration with the IAM Identity Center, and I created my personal account with one AD and one not. So you will see in my URL, I have a custom console URL, not the normal one. So what that will do, yeah, okay. What that will do, and you should use a password manager for this. So there's a username, password, and MFA. And then once it logs in, it looks something like this. So if you have applications that you integrate with this federated access, it will show there, be it like Slack, be it like whatever applications, and then you have a list of accounts. Within that account, I have a role administrative access, and my API keys is set to a minute. So every minute you refresh, my application gets a refresh token. So if you want to grab the credits, go for it. It's not going to be there after that closes. So that's kind of how it looks. On the different operating systems, you have the access key ID, the access key physically, and then with SSO you will have a session token. That's one different. So when you configure your profile, if you use different profiles, so you have a bunch of AWS accounts, you can configure your profiles like this and have multiple profiles. And then the token ID over there, and then you can switch your profile you're connecting to in the AWS CLI like that. And that's how you do it on the federated side. What I can also show you when you sign into the account, so you will notice I have an administrative access role, but I can't see the cost because once I want to demo, I don't want to show everyone how much I spend on cost, even though I have a lot of credits. So then we go to the identity center and we can look in there. Basically, oh yeah, quite annoying. It's only available in one region. So you have to switch some regions. It's like a global service. This one you have to specifically switch to identity center. And there's the user I'm currently logged in now. So there's just a display name and it's enabled. And just a normal profile information. Here's the group set, so very generic administrative group because it's my login. I don't want to be blocked. And then I do have an MFA device, and obviously you can see here I have an active session. So that's kind of where you set up users to this. And what I can do that. Which you want to verify. Now we don't need to verify. Do that. Just add some details. And change the display, and there we go. So yeah, that's good. Wait. Can't have spaces there. And then let's add no groups. Just a random user, no groups, no nothing. Just want to show you. So there is what you will see. It will generate a one-time password for this user. And then let's do, multi, AWS is on. Let's just do that in private mode. Very fresh one. So now we had set that user to the Meetup user. And the password, no MFA at this point, so it wants to create a new password. Because it's first time I'm logging in. But now, it has not been assigned to any account, there is no permissions, I can't do nothing. So now what I can do is, here, there's no AWS accounts, no groups. So what I now can do, go search, I want to give access to that account with no permission set, but then you need a permission set. So now when I set that, let's give that role also admin. There we go. And there we go. That's our permission set and the IAM Identity Center works. Fairly straightforward. The only requirement is, if I can spell, organizations. You need to use organizations with this. So what I have is a root user, as Christian spoke, never use that. That's why I use my IAM user. And that is the management account, my default account I log into. And you need to set up this organization. It's free, you don't pay for it, but that's a requirement for Identity to use it as access portal and the access keys. Easy days. Happy days. Any questions regarding that quick 5-minute demo?
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much, guys, for joining. Thank you, Christian, for the talk. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We will then, from the next week, we'll have to announce the next meetup, the next topic. We'll probably do that here. But yeah, thanks for everyone that came through and enjoy the rest of the night.